This building was built in 1918 as the Defiance High School building. That was what led into like the story of the janitor mall and everything like that. But there were other things that happened at the high school, not necessarily in the high school.
I've written 2 local history books now, but this first one, this school, this is a shot taken from the bell tower of the previous school, but looking up Clinton Street here. So when we were trying to get this on the National Register, all that work we've done, all that information we have, we really need to do something with it. And then I saw that picture, and it gave me the thought, the school needs to tell what it saw, because it had the bird's eye view of downtown for all those years. But I keep trying to preach to the locals, powers that be, it's important to preserve structures like this because it's a big component, I think, for mental health that people don't understand, they overlook. I'm in the funeral business. I own a private cemetery. And so we see this a lot, with people that are visiting graves. They're finding a way to stay connected to what they lost. And when I was writing this book and I was doing the pre-sale for it, and when we were also doing the history research, people knew I was involved in that. I just had so many people come up and say thanks for trying to save that structure. And one of the best stories, a guy was doing physical therapy just down the street here, and his assignment was he lived also close in the area, his assignment was to walk every day. And so he said what he'd started doing was coming down here to the school and walking the perimeter, and he would just touch the building at certain points. And he said by touching the building, it could take me back in time to when I was young, before all these things happened to me, before life happened to me. And it was a touchstone for him. And I think a lot of people don't understand how to verbalize that, but history pieces like this can become those touchstones. What our founders did when they carved this town out of a literal wilderness was something. And this was the West. This was the Western frontier. People don't get that. They think it's California and stuff. That came so much later. These people that literally carved their way through a forest of woods and swamp and native people and got here, it was amazing that they could do that. And the guys that were here in Defiance wanted to make this quite a place. If you look, for 50-mile radius, if you look at a topographical map, everything, all the water for 50 miles around flows to Defiance. And then the Maumee River becomes the largest tributary to Lake Erie. The native people knew that, and that's why Defiance was a gathering place for native people, because they knew the water came this way, and they followed the water. And so that gathering spot, William Holgate wrote about this as he's one of the founders of this town. So in the early 1800s, he wrote that this was a magical gathering spot for the native people, and it continues, that magic, that energy continues today. That's what he wrote in the mid-1800s when he was later in life and had accomplished a lot. So I feel that that energy is still here. It still draws people here. But they put the school here at the crown of the downtown because everybody was coming in off of the canal at the other end and walking through the downtown to see what was here, and they were all walking towards the school. And they wanted everybody to know that education was going to be the crown and the building point of this town. If they settled here, their kids would get good educations because they knew that education was the key to success and to building an industrial town. This was such a great training ground for industry. I mean, if you cut out I think it's the 1938 Year of Progress paper, every guy that was on that school board was an industry leader, had huge factories in town. They were on the school boards. And we were renowned for our program of developing people that were going to go into mold makers, pattern makers, tool and die men, Defiance Manufacturing Company over on Perry Street. they had one of the best programs. They took all these kids their dads were employed over there. These kids were working with their dads in the evenings in the basements and stuff and learning. The school was reinforcing that and moving these kids into the industry, and Defiance just boomed as an industry. I think that had to have been such an exciting time for guys. But then I read the stories about women, and I know that, for example, I wrote about the suffrage movement. And one of the arguments that one of the young ladies made was, there's more of us girls graduating these schools than boys, because a lot of the boys leave to work in the farms with their parents before graduation. More girls are graduating. We're sitting side by side with these boys, often getting higher marks than them in school. But when our graduation ends here, that education ends for most of us, and there is nothing to do with that learning, that will give us employment. And so I think about those things too. It's more group, I guess, is my understanding, than specific individual experiences. But that must have been tough to think about for some of those kids. I do not believe in the paranormal. I do not believe that there are spirits out there that we are supposed to be talking about. It may exist, but I heard a lady that she did some of this communication with the spirits, and she said when people get hung up on seeing that and communicating in that way, it's a low-level energy. It's not a high energy, it's a low-level energy. It's there, but people shouldn't be picking it up, because it can become very unhealthy if you dwell too much on it.
I know that this building is like an icon, and even before this building there was a lot of history with this land, just this plot of land in general, going all the way back to the 1800s with, I think even before the 1800s, which is the seminary, the women's seminary that they had. And one of the buildings was actually on these grounds, because they had like 7 or something around town. And one of them was on these grounds. And then shortly after that, of course, the high school got built. That was what led into like the story of the janitor mall and everything like that. But there were other things that happened at the high school, not necessarily in the high school, but like relating to the high school. I think there's a lot of energy on the grounds, but I think that there's a lot of things that have tied to the school somehow. For instance, football players. 2 players collided on field, and one of them, they both collapsed, fell unconscious, but one woke up and was able to walk off under his own power. The other player was not, like it even said in the article, not expected to recover. So I mean, you think about something that happened out there, and he may not have died out there on that field, but the incident happened right there. I do think that students, maybe they had their best memories here, their worst memories here. But even like Trish said, a time when there was less on people's plates, when, like she said, the tough lives that, you grow up and have bills and responsibilities, whereas a kid, you don't really necessarily feel all that, or you don't feel that pressure, you don't feel that burden. So it's an easier time, a simpler time, right? And I would imagine like if we're talking about spirits or anything else, they would want to come back to places that were simpler for them, where they were happiest. I think that if I was, logically speaking, right, if I was a spirit, I'd go back to where I was happiest, where I had my best memories. I would consider myself a skeptical believer in the paranormal. I believe that there's something going on. I don't want to say what, because I think there's so many different things that it could be. We have a very little understanding of the inner workings of our universe. And I also think that it's possible it may not be what we all think it is. It could be something completely different, and I know people that explore different paths than that, and I admire all the different paths that people take, and so, but I'm very skeptical of evidence that people show me. But I have to be. As a researcher, you have to be skeptical of all claims. And so people sometimes will get upset with me or whatever, feel offended because I didn't believe their story 100%, or I question everything that they're doing. But that's just my nature. If you're on site and you are just looking for responses, whatever, you're either a ghost hunter or an investigator, right? But if you're a researcher, there's things that you're looking deeper into. like beyond just the surface, you know, the bumps and the voices or whatever, right? There's got to be more to it than that. And a lot of people will basically accept the mainstream belief system that I call it, that, you know, spirits, EMF, all that different stuff. But I think that there's more that you have to look into. And even if you were to look at a scientific researcher or a historical researcher, they're trying to find out every little piece of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is I'm not so much just looking on the surface things, looking for activity. I'm looking for why, or like how these things are happening. Scientifically, how are these things happening? Because there's got to be there's a scientific explanation for literally everything, even if it's just an anomalous scientific explanation. But there's got to be some manipulation happening. And where is that manipulation happening? And that's where like the research starts to dive into it. Some of the stories that I've heard about this place, a lot of it all goes back to some of the things that happened in history. Like for instance, the Janitor Mall case, and I don't know how graphic or how...
Say it.
Okay. So Janitor Mall, apparently, you know, this was in the high school before this building was built. Janitor Mall had walked in on the superintendent of the school, and by the way, who is a very, very prominent figure in the community at the time, in a compromising position with a teacher. And apparently it wasn't just it wasn't a female teacher either. And so when he walked in on that, he saw it, but he kind of used it he just kind of kept his mouth shut about it. Until there was an instance where Janitor Mall and a teacher apparently took somebody down to the basement, a student down in the basement, and like gave him a whipping, you know, like I don't know how it was, whether it was like, I don't know, regardless, the kid was being disruptive, whatever they did, and it was wrong, but the superintendent found out about it, obviously, and, you know, started started raising issue about it. And Janitor Mall, of course, having seen what he saw, started to come back at him. Shortly after that, you know, there was this huge court battle, and they could never they could never do anything with regards to the superintendent because of his power. But Janitor Mall, at one point, I guess, was beaten or whatever, thrown onto the railroad tracks. And he had his legs amputated off by a train, and he was beaten so severely that he did not recover from that. And nobody can ever figure out what truly happened, or nobody's been able to. Although, you know, when you read the stories and you read everything that happened and the sequence of events, or the series of events, it kind of makes it obvious that the superintendent had something to do with it. But I think that Janitor Mall himself is probably not happy about what transpired, and so I think that he is probably here. I think that if anything else that might be coming in here is more or less children, just people that are attached to the building, a long-time principal maybe, or, you know, whatever. But, you know, there was also that valedictorian, I believe, in, I can't remember the date, like 1902 or something like that. She was a 16-year-old. She was going to be valedictorian of the graduating class, drowned in a creek, like, what was it, like 2 weeks before graduation or something. And I mean, there was that student not too long ago, even, and I won't get into detail because it's recent, but one of my teammates had a friend who was walking along the tracks and got killed while he was at this school. So, like, you know, when you think, even he said that after that happened, like the entire school during lunch period, everything was just quiet because everybody could feel the energy from that. You know, that was traumatic. Like, a student that went here was killed in the tracks, and they don't know if it was suicide or if he just had his headphones on, couldn't hear the train, whatever, but he was walking along the tracks. I think that there's so many pieces of that kind of contribute to everything. I've heard all of those stories, you know, and I've seen a shadow figure multiple times up on the third floor. You know, one night when we were investigating here, we actually had a couple of our investigators end up running out of the building. Apparently, they kept getting a woman talking about a fire, and then they said that they saw something on the ground run at them, like on the ground. And so they ran outside and locked themselves out of the building and had to call us to come and let them back in. But like, that's some of the stuff that has happened to us here.
You have investigated this place how many times?
Probably 4 or 5 times.
4 or 5. Of those 4 or 5 times, is there 2 or 3 pieces of evidence that you have that you are just incredibly proud of, and maybe, wow, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely one. I had a guy by the name of CJ Faison. He's a race car, he's a NASCAR driver or a Sprint Cup Series driver, whatever. And he also does other stuff, but he has a YouTube channel with paranormal, you know. And him and I were investigating in here, and he had his 2 other friends with him, and we split up. And there was one point where we were on this floor here, and they were in the gym. There's me and Chris, and then him and Dylan over in the gym area. And me and him decided that we had to go upstairs because we couldn't hear over Dylan and CJ talking. And they were all the way in the gym. And so we thought, oh, you know, a vent, something, right? We get up to the 2nd floor, we can still hear them. And we text, or we call CJ, and he tells us that him and Dylan have been dead silent in that gym for the last like 30 minutes. And me and Chris are looking at each other like, there is no way. We had to move places because we could hear you. They're like, dude, we haven't said a word. We've just been sitting here. So that was interesting. And then there was another instance where we were on the 3rd floor again, and we kept hearing knocking on the, you know, just like a quick knock on the lockers. But we would hear it on each end of the hallway. And we knew it was a knock, like somebody tapped on it. It's distinctly different from anything other sound. Does that have a timer on it?
No. And these, I took them off the charger today. That was weird.
Okay. Include that in the document.
I definitely
include that.
Wow, that was okay.
Shoot, where was? Oh yeah, we were upstairs. We kept going back and forth between each side because we kept hearing these knocks. And then we stayed over on, I want to say it was this side actually. That's a door moving.
Is that the basement door?
And it's the light went out again.
I thought it was this door right here.
It definitely sounded like it was right in here.
Ooh, I got chills right now. I don't know about you, but
I don't know what the problem is with this. The battery's still at...
John Mall, you wanna show us that it's you? Maybe close one of the doors?
Maybe one of the lockers? Please? I like messing with the lights. He's like, I like the lights.
The lights are easier. Lights are a little bit easier for me.
Well, honestly, that was pretty much the end of my questions anyway.
Well, the thing that I was gonna finish was on the 3rd floor when we were running back and forth. Finally, we stayed over here, and I'm standing right here holding the camera, and CJ's like right over here. And next thing I hear is like right next to me, and that scared the living hell out of me because, I mean, it was right there. That's outside. Has this ever happened before? How long have you had those? How many times have you used it?
This is the 2nd time I've used it.
Okay.
But this is never... It says the battery's still at 60.
Is everything connected properly, maybe? Is it overheating?
I don't think so.
No.
Mm-mm.
Completely cool.
It's kind of weird.
Thanks, John.
It's too bright. Turn it down.
So I guess kind of wrapping it up, in a sentence or two, the old junior, senior high school here at Defiance, do you believe, let me
that's just gonna have to be part of the interview,
That's just gonna
apparently.
have to
I
be
mean,
part of it.
whatever.
That's so cool. But do you believe this location has possibly darkness tied to it?
Darkness, I don't know if I'd say darkness. I definitely believe that there's energy here, and especially with regards to, I mean, even like talking about preservation. I mean, there's a lot of potential here, and I think that the energy of this place, the energy of the past, knows that there's importance to this building.
It's important that the school is preserved because it is a touchstone in the community. It is a building that everyone of several generations experienced. So everyone can come back as that touchstone of a place to revisit before life got so hard. Not for everyone. Some kids had that tough experience at a young age, but for the majority of people, it's just one of those public buildings that made lasting impression that they can return to and have that feeling of.
Everybody in this community somehow was tied to this building. Somehow, some way, either they went here, they had family that went here, whatever. And I mean, just the amount of space, the amount of size, like the size of this place, the amount of space inside. I think that, I mean, there's so much that could be done with it, and we need to save it. But the darkness, I think that there's spirits here, and I think that there's mysteries that need to be solved. And I think that John Mall should get his justice, whether it's 100 years later or not. And I think that until that happens, John is just going to be here. He's not going to let people forget about him, and rightfully so.